Thank you for joining us today at Miniature Wargaming Labs, where today we will be painting our Deathclaw from the Fallout starter kit here. And so the way I started with this guy, primed him standard Mechanicus Gray. That's my preferred, but you could also use Army Painter Gray, or if you want, Krylon Primer Gray. Very cheap, widely available. So let's start with the color I used. Most of the models painted a Dryad bark with a highlight of, well, dry brush of Mornfang Brown across the top, and then a dry brush of XV88 on his underside there. Try to give him a little variance between his top skin and his bottom skin. That's all then washed with Nuln Oil. And once it's all dried, we once again go and XV88 dry brush the underside and Mornfang Brown dry brush basically the areas that the light can see. And you can see here on the base, all the dirt patches are Bugman's Glow. All the rock is standard Mechanicus Gray. And the bits of concrete there are Ash Gray. Washed with Nuln Oil and then dry brushed with Vallejo's German Camouflage Beige World War II to give it a dusty look. I also moved some of that dustiness up onto his foot. I like to do that to make it look like the environment's rubbing off on him. Now the horn, the teeth, talons, bone spikes here. Add some detail and give you a chance to get some interest in the model despite having all these shades of brown. So the bone is starting off as Meneth White base with the Nuln Oil, and I just dry brush back over with the Meneth White base. So this is a really simple, really quick model to paint and to do. So let's go ahead and get started. So our Deathclaw is primed standard Mechanicus Gray. And over that, I'm going to put a layer of Dryad bark. And so I'm going to just use one of my rougher brushes I bought from Michael's and just work this into all the crevices. For our next step, we're going to put a light dry brush of Mornfang Brown. For that, I'm going to get my Games Workshop small dry brush. I'm going to get a little bit of paint, and I've got a sheet of paper off screen. I'm going to wipe most of it off. So just putting a light hint of that brown. So I finished putting the light dry brush of the Mornfang Brown on my Deathclaw. Now something that I did is these undersides of his skin, so his belly and his throat here, parts of his arms and hands, and down his tail, I put a couple extra passes to lighten it up more. And the reason for that is I want his back to look darker than his tummy. And I'm going to take some XV88. I'm going to put another layer of dry brush on these undersides. And that's to make it look like his scales have a different color. So I'm going to put most of the paint down the center line of his stomach. And then right here, when it transitions to darker, Just going to put a little bit less. And this will give me a fade from here to here. Let's try that one more time. Most of the paint off the brush, and then just a little bit. So that's coming along just fine. So I'm going to keep that going down the length of his forehands and into his palms. And just a little bit of paint will accomplish what I'm looking for. And then we'll do that down the underside of his tail slightly. So I'll go ahead and finish this up. So I finished dry brushing his underside. So to make this model pop a little bit more, I'm going to take a khaki color, in this case P3's Meneth white base. I'm going to do his claws here, his horn, and some of these bone spurs down the back of his spine. And get some of his teeth in there, get a little touch. So here's where we switch back to a fine tip brush, because at this point we don't want to mistakenly cross into his scaly skin. So now the horns and the claws, I'm just going to completely paint that. But with the teeth, I'm just going to run light touches, like I did with dry brushing. Just give the hint of the teeth. And for his bone spurs, I got this one, so these big ones done running down the ridge of his back here. I'm just going to completely paint. But these ones further down, so you can probably pick which ones you want to completely block in. So something like this, I'll just run these little baby ones, I'll just run the edge. Maybe I'll do these ones down here. As you paint your model, start putting together, say what do you want. I go around, finish filling these in. I'm going to let this top part dry right here and start working on the base. So I've got a couple different textures to play with here, and for the long areas of flat dirt, I'm going to use Bugman's Glow. And I'm just going to slop it in there, being careful not to hit the model's toenails that I just painted. I'm just going to use a sloppy brush I have. I tend to beat brushes to hell over time, but they still have a use. Now I got the areas I want to mark as dirt. Got a couple other sections here, so I want to do this tire in black, and this is going to be sidewalk right here, so that's going to be gray. Now these stones, doesn't seem like I should bother with, but I'm going to touch them up with some standard Mechanicus gray. Got a little bit of brown on them in the back here. I'm going to do that with the sidewalk too. Just clean them up. Alright, going to let that gray dry. And as we do that, I'm going to take some Abaddon black. And I'm just going to block in this tire. Now, since I wanted to differentiate this texture of stone here from this, which I want to portray as broken down sidewalk, I'm going to go over the Mechanicus gray with Army Painter's ash gray, so a lighter gray. It's already mixed them up in my palette, and I'm just going to dabble some on here. I really watered it down. Now, if you're thinking the paint looks streaky and runny in this current state, you'll see. When we wash it and dry brush over it, it'll make sense as concrete. Alright, now we'll let that dry. So that everything's dry right now, and it's looking pretty good, going according to plan. Now to apply my favorite thing, Nuln Oil. And this adds a lot of interest to the model. So I've got my brush that I use for Nuln Oil. I've beaten it to heck in the past. So we'll just start rubbing this stuff in. You want to do it turning it upside down, then turning it right side up. Make sure you get everything with this. And in this case, I'm going to do a thick, heavy coat. All over the base too. Now that this guy's all dried off, I'm ready to work on the next thing. That's going to be back to the bone, the claws, the talon parts of the model. So I'm going to start with his horns. I'm going to get back my dry brush and my Maneth white base. So any khaki color would do. and I'm going to dip a little bit of paint. I'm going to rub it around. Now at this stage, when I rub off the paint, I want to get it to the point of where I say, do I even have any paint left on the brush? And that's when I know it's ready. And see how that smooths out the finish there. And I want to move down some of these bone spurs here. Do a little bit on the claws. So we're going to go around and just dry brush these bone spurs here and the claws. So the horns and the bone work, talons are looking good. So I want to go back to XV88. What I want to do is pump up the contrast on his tummy again. So I'm going to go back, get some XV88 on my dry brush, and once again at this stage we're going to wipe off enough of the paint to where we wonder if we even have some left on it. And we're just going to lightly brush down the same undersides we did before. So look at that, really seeing a lot of the muscle and bone in that one. So now that I've dry brushed his underside, I'm going to go back to the Mornfang Brown, and I'm going to do a touch more dry brushing. And in this case, I'm going to put it on my brush. I'm going to get a lot of it off, but I only want to dry brush those areas where the light is coming down, so to make it look like those elements. So we can take the model, look at it this way, and say, where would light hit? So you can see the difference between that side and that side. Just gives a light, subtle color change. Also allows me to clean up any place where I splattered the Meneth white. Get the top of his hips. Alright, there we go. That'll give us some contrast to show off some of the great muscle detailing in this model. Now the last step I want to do on this model is to deal with his base. For that, what I do with all my Fallout miniatures is I put a dusting of German camo beige, World War II, and this is just to create like a dusty look to the post-apocalyptic world. I don't need much, just something to highlight the texture that they put into the dirt and the rocks here. And if you want, you can actually have a little bit of the dust going up the model to show that he's getting dirty from walking around. Alright, and the final step, I like to trim the base there. I'm going to take some Abaddon Black. I'm going to take this one because it acts kind of like pencil, and basically I'm just going to draw around the edge there. Just want to make a nice sharp line. And I do this because I went to a painting competition and the judge said I should make that sharp distinction to make it look as if I ripped the guy out of the board. This is the black rim underneath it. Alright, so now I'll call that guy done. And we'll go ahead and seal him up. I'll actually probably get a little green tuff to make it look like a little piece of grass that's growing out of the tire. That'd be cool. But very well done, well sculpted model. A lot of detail in this one. So thank you for joining us at Miniature Wargaming Labs, and we'll see you next time.